Hello, my presentation today will be on Apple Incorporated. My goal was to do a deep dive into Apple's financials and business model, as well as their employee treatment and how it looks from the inside, and the topics that I will discuss on the next slide. I hoped to look at their history, products, threats and challenges, opportunities for growth, sustainability, and their financials. So, the history of Apple. Can you imagine, for you personally, being a co founder of the company and taking a check for $800 to buy your way out? So, Apple was founded by Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs on April 1st, 1976. They were both college dropouts, and there was a third founder of the company that left before it gained any traction and when he thought that it was not going to be successful. The first Apple product was the Apple I. It was meant for hobbyists, and the Apple II release was what really revolutionized the computer industry with the introduction of first ever color graphics. The Apple II helped sales jump from 7.8 million in 1978 to 117 million in 1980. So on the screen are graphics from the release of the Macintosh. So in 1984, Apple released the Macintosh. It was intended to be a low-cost computer for the everyday user. This caused disassembly eventually of the Apple division compared to the Macintosh division. So the Macintosh 128K ran system software later renamed Mac OS, which is important because that is still the title of the Mac software used today. The differentiating the terms Mac and Apple at the time seems insignificant because they are used interchangeably. If you say you have an Apple computer, people know you have a Mac of some sort. But at the time, there were two divisions within the company. There was Apple computers, which were Apple I, Apple II, eventually computers like Lisa, and then there were Macintosh computers, which were essentially competing with each other within the company because money was either going to one or the other. This was key in Apple's growth as a company as well. With the growth of the company comes internal issues, internal leadership problems. This caused Jobs to leave in 1985. He started Next Software. And because of the work that he had done in the company, Apple did well into the 80s, and their highest profits hit at 1990. They were essentially relying on Jobs' old actions within the company to keep them afloat and keep them successful. And it's quoted that Apple's market share suffered slowly after its peak in 1990, and by 1996, experts believed the company to be doomed. It was not until 1997, when Apple was desperately in need of an operating system, that it bought out Next Software. So again, this caused Jobs to come back to Apple. He was the interim CEO and became the official CEO in 2000. Prior to 2007, actually, Apple Inc. was Apple Computers when they started the company, and then when they were only releasing computers with one or two products here or there that weren't computers, they were named Apple Computers, shortened to Apple, but the long name was Apple Computers. In 2007, with the release of the iPhone and a handful of other products, Jobs changed the company name to Apple Inc. So the graph pictured here is Apple's market value ascension, essentially. In 2011, with Steve Jobs' death, Tim Cook took over as CEO, and Apple was the first company valued at $1 trillion in 2018, and then 2 years later doubled that figure at $2 trillion. They were competing with companies like Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and then 16 months later hit 3 trillion in 2022. So the next thing I looked at were types of products, both historically and what they sell now. So there has obviously been a slight evolution of the products that Apple sells. Apple II was released in 1977, like I said, followed by devices like the 2 Plus, 3, Lisa. The Apple III and Lisa were not successful. Lisa attempted to sell for $10,000 in the 80s, which people would barely even pay now. The Macintosh release in 1984 was significant, and from 1985 to 1995, there were roughly 12 new devices, all varying from Macintosh to Apple. The Apple IIGS was the last Apple device, released in 1986 and discontinued in 1992. This ended the Apple division, with the focus shifting to solely Macintosh devices. In 1999, the release of the iBook was Jobs' attempt at one of the laptops that would essentially mirror what laptops would become in the future. The iPod release in 2001 was significant, the first small portable device from Apple that was more successful than previous devices. The turn of the new century meant lots of computers that you look at looking more like what they do now. In 2007, the release of the iPhone, iMac, Apple TV, and iPod Touch were all significant. The iPhone release was what really set in motion phones today, Apple's success, and as you can see on the graph on the previous slide, that was when their market value started shooting up. In 2008, the MacBook Air was released. 2010 was the iPad. 2012 MacBook Pro, and 2014 the Apple Watch was released. Here's a fun timeline of all the products. So as you can see, the second row, the iBook is going to be the first device that looks a tiny bit more like the computers that we have now, followed by all the MacBook releases. The top row are going to be any desktop computers. The third is anything that is labeled more as an accessory. And then as you get down are devices added with the popularity of Apple. The next category that I'm going to be talking about are Apple's threats and challenges. The biggest competitor and earliest competitor that they faced will and always will be, it was and always will be, other tech companies competing for the same consumers. They especially also, Apple's currently dealing with their App Store algorithm controversy. They receive nonstop press, and they have to deal with new releases in the product lifecycle. In the 1980s, both Microsoft and Apple were competing for graphical user interface. Microsoft was creating Windows, and Apple was refining Macintosh. In 1992, Macs offered an excellent but limited library of software on expensive computers. Meanwhile, Microsoft was selling Windows 3.0 on cheap commodity computers, like you can see on your screen. Apple put too much focus and money into the IBM and Motorola PowerPC microprocessor instead of the Intel processor at the time, which was used in most computers for at least a decade or two following Apple's switch to using that. This caused declining success in the company for Apple, and therefore brought Jobs back as interim CEO in the 80s and 90s. With Jobs coming back, New campaigns went out, like the one on the screen, Think Different with Fleetwood Mac. Ironically, probably not ironically, Apple's very intentional about everything they do. But there was a deal made with Microsoft. So Microsoft essentially saved Apple. This announcement at the Macworld Expo with Bill Gates. They made a deal to make nice, and it essentially led to $150 million investments into Apple. Apple did switch to the Intel processor, like I said, and they used it until 2020 when they released their own chip, their own processor. Here is a slide roughly showing the market capitalization prior to 2014. So with the pandemic causing issues with supply chains in 2020, Microsoft beat Apple, which you can't see on the graph. But Microsoft beat Apple in market cap when they were at 2.49 trillion and Apple was at 2.46 trillion. However, at the end of 2022, 3 months after CNBC reported Microsoft was ahead of its competitor, Apple did in fact reach their monumentous 3 trillion. Another threat and challenge currently is the Elon Musk, Twitter, and Apple war. So in 2021, Epic Games, which started Fortnite, versus Epic Games versus Apple court case was about the controversy over the 30% commission from the App Store in Apple that they were thinking causes an illegal monopoly over how developers can process payment from mobile games. So there are internal payment systems that cause um, developers to up their prices and put more money towards Apple through that commission and through that payment system. Epic Games' goal in the whole case was to eliminate that commission, which would then cause developers to not have to use the payment system and prices would be lowered. So recently in the news, Elon Musk has bought Twitter, and he is upset both about the commission and about Twitter being under review by Apple for their guidelines. With any tech company, there will always be issues with new devices. The release of the iPhone 14 caused there were bugs with iOS 16 release. They had to release iOS 16.2 with those bugs to remedy those bugs. On their website, regarding their life cycle of devices, Apple states multiple generations of Apple products can benefit from updates that protect your platform from security vulnerability and offer enhanced productivity features. So, Apple's opportunities for growth. I only focused on one opportunity because it hits very close to home for anybody that is in San Diego. They recently purchased the Rancho Bernardo Vista Corporate Center, which consists of about 5 tech companies. They bought it for $445 million, and it is their first commercial purchase in San Diego County. They have a goal of increasing their employees to 5,000 in the area by 2026. I don't know if that's the whole area or just at this specific location. This will help the jobs and housing market in Rancho Bernardo specifically, and definitely add jobs in an increasing tech world. So this is roughly a look at the area that they bought. Again, like I said, there's a handful of tech companies that they bought the old buildings for. Intel was over there, Northrop Grumman, and a handful of others. The next category I looked at were sustainability measures. A growth in technology is always going to be a hopeful growth in sustainability. So Apple has made small changes. They no longer have plastic wrap on their iPhone boxes. I believe it might be on other devices as well, but I only know about the iPhone boxes. They have carbon reduction in their M1 chip. They have 100% recyclable aluminum enclosure in their iPad, and there's no mercury, PVC, beryllium, or BFRs in their Apple Watch. Their iPhone has 100% recycled gold camera wires, 100% recycled rare earth elements in their magnets, and they focus on disassembling the product into recyclable parts. They are down 75% in single-use plastic packaging since 2015. So the slide above talks about their carbon neutral goals. By 2020, their goal was to be carbon neutral in their operations, which they successfully did. And their goal by 2030 is to have carbon neutral products. They release an environmental progress report every year based on the previous fiscal year, and their 218-page report for the 2021 fiscal year states that their revenue was up 33%, but that they are still taking steps to be sustainable. And one example was that over 200 of their suppliers are using 100% renewable energy. Here is a graph roughly looking at their carbon emission goals prior to 2021. This was released in 2020. They also focus on the high value of trade-ins. They recycle the metals in these devices, and they recently stopped giving out chargers in their watch and iPhone boxes. This resulted in smaller packaging, and there was a statement that said Apple actively defends this decision of theirs, stating that this very removal of chargers allows the recycling of over 861,000 metric tons of copper, tin, and zinc. The smaller packaging, seeing a 70% decrease, also means there's less overall wastage in the process. They were met with a lot of backlash, saying that it was a financial decision to remove the chargers, that it was for their own benefit, but it was a sustainability practice as well. And the last thing, a quick look at Apple's financials. So I created a graph with their numbers from their financial statements released on September 24th of 2022, as well as the comparison from their 2021 numbers. Their total revenue was up significantly from 2021 at 394 million compared to 356 million. Their gross profit was up from 152 to 170. Their total assets were only up by a million, obviously seemingly not significant, but it's a lot of money that I forget about. Total liabilities were up as well from 287 to 302. Net income was up 5 million from 94 to 99. So I chose to do my report on Apple because my husband is an engineer for them. He is currently a software engineer in test. So he tests products. He helps write codes for products like the Apple TV software. And because of that, we have just seen Apple's internal practices. So we've seen their employee treatment. We have seen that they are one of the best companies to work for, bottom line, that they allow for the jobs where if you want to work 80 hours a week, you can. If you want to do what he does and work about 45 hours a week, you can do that. They have smaller incentives that are really impactful to families, one being seemingly small, but if you work at a corporate building that does not have a gym, they reimburse you for a gym membership per year. They prioritize things that are scientifically proven to make their employees more effective and cause just better lives overall. They have that. They have moving incentives for if you're moving to be with their company, things like that. So just looking at this company through my project, I enjoyed learning the history. I enjoyed looking at their sustainability, and I hope you did too. Thank you for watching.